I love this quote from you. Every day at ICE is an evolution. We have thousands of new questions and an equal number of problems, and we have no idea where to begin. So I think that's awesome.
I don't know where that's from, but that's true.
Well, you said it. Open ICE, which is part of this, you'll talk about all of this, I'm sure. Entice, ICE Commons. Of course, you played Density 21.5, and you had this project going to commission a 22-year commissioning project to commission a whole new body of flute repertoire between now and the centenary of Density 21.5. 2012 MacArthur Fellow. Honorary degrees. This is all before the ripe old age of 40. So there's a quote that we have here from you, from your, I think, an address you did at Northwestern. Whether we like it or not, the call of our generation is not to occupy positions created for us. Our calling is to create positions for ourselves, for one another, to improvise, to invent. In short, our calling is to be entrepreneurs. And I guess the place that I want to start is, I like the whether we like it or not part, because this is a business where there's been some resistance to change, I think you could say. And I'd be interested in really hearing what your evolution has been. I mean, where you started from, and we'll talk about sort of all the great things you're doing now and will do in the future, but how did you get to where you are?
Well, I mean, I should say, first of all, in reaction to that quote, which was a speech I gave 3 years ago, it was the first time I'd been asked to speak to a group of students in that kind of formal capacity. And it was commencement, and I had to wear a robe, and I, of course, was intimidated by the invitation to do that, but I really wanted to say something that I wish had been said to me, and I wanted to invite a group of musicians who were just about to enter this really difficult, complicated world that I don't believe their education was preparing them for. I wanted to tell them something that was truthful and also hopeful. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I did my best. That statement, among all the other things that I said in that speech, has been the one that's been the most criticized, taken apart, and taken down. And in hearing you read it, something came to mind that I haven't thought of in a while, but Hildegard von Bingen, who for me was like just one of the greatest thinkers, activists, scholars, musicians, just agents of change in all of human history, she said it much better. She said what I was trying to say, but she said it much more elegantly, and she said, we cannot live in a world that is interpreted for us by others. An interpreted world is not a hope. And, the word entrepreneur has become, I think, very tired and very problematic, and I don't really like the word anymore. 3 years was a long time ago. It's been co-opted by a lot of people who are not using it in the way that I was inspired to use it, and I think bring some attention, maybe some precision to its original meaning, which is simply to undertake something. And the original Sanskrit comes from something very beautiful, which is inspiration from within. And if that's not the act of making music and the act of building an environment in which we all want to be making music and living and working, I don't know what is. But the terminology aside, we can get into the politics of that. I think what von Bingen was saying is really the crux of the matter, which is that we are responsible for creating our world. If we are going into a world that has been interpreted for us by the academy, by the corporate world, by our teachers, even by our mentors, that's not our world. Our world is the one that we are creating and reinventing and that we're responsible for. So that was my hope. That was the invitation I was hoping to make to a group of young people. A lot has changed in the last 3 years, but that is still my hope. And when I had the great privilege of speaking with students last night in the composition and woodwind department, we talked about this very thing. And I know you guys are thinking about it, and I'm excited to see what you come up with, because the world that I have interpreted is going to be very, very different from the one that you are interpreting for yourselves and for one another.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Did you always envision yourself? Did you ever envision yourself on a standard course?
No.
As a musician?
There were moments where I tried. I really did. I tried. And I was never fulfilled. And at a certain point, you try, and you keep realizing that this is not who you are. And Socrates says, "Know thyself." Well, yeah, that's really easy. It takes an entire lifetime to know yourself. But when you're in school, you have the time to get to know yourself in a way that you don't when life is moving really fast outside of school. So I spent a lot of time in school trying to get to know that part of myself that just wanted to rebel against any of the paths that were laid out for me. And really interrogating it and trying to change it and realizing in that failure to do any of those things that who I was somebody who wanted to make things. And I wanted to make my own path. And I don't think that's exceptional. I think that's whether we occupy positions created for us, and there still are some jobs out there, and they're wonderful jobs. There are fewer and fewer of them. Whether that's a calling or whether our calling is to create something entirely new, the situation we are in culturally, financially, psychologically right now in the world, I think it is an environment that is necessary for all of us, no matter what path we're on, to really know ourselves and become who we are. And that's very different.
So what do you think is the state of the music world?
I think it is both disastrous and immensely hopeful. I think that it's lazy to focus on one or the other. If we want to live in a world that is not interpreted by others, then we need to see with both of those eyes. And I think it is both, it's a wretched situation, and it's also, I think we are in, or very soon will be in, a new renaissance culturally.
So give us your sense of why it's wretched, and then tell us what gives you hope.
Well, the wretched stuff it's obvious, right? There aren't jobs for all of you waiting. I wish that there were. It's extremely difficult to make a living doing what you love. It was never my intention to make a living. I just wanted to do what I loved. And I wanted very much for the people that I loved to also be able to do what they loved. And, the living came later. It's still coming. But I think that's we could go on and on about all the things that we know, and unfair labor practices, and the dearth of the kinds of opportunities that all of you absolutely deserve. It's not a question of deserve, but Paulo Freire said something that influenced my thinking very early on. He said that the practice of freedom is what education really should be, and that young people learning to deal critically and creatively with reality will bring about the discovery of themselves and the transformation of their worlds. He said it better than that. I'm paraphrasing, but that's really, to me, that's very critical, because the wretched part that's reality. It's reality.
Well, I ran an orchestra.
Yeah, which does not mean let's all go home and cry about it. It also does not mean let's all go look for like a slogan or a solution. And frankly, entrepreneurship, I don't know when it became a ship. Like, it's so funny that it's a ship. Like, can it be something, that flies, or like just the fact that it's a ship, it's like relationship, entrepreneurship, but
slow moving.
Right.
Yeah.
But interestingly, entrepreneurship became this slogan, and it was co-opted by academic institutions, by institutes, and by people who just said, well, this is, the classical music world's broken, there aren't any jobs, so you got entrepreneurship to help you fix it. It's like, that's not the point. That's not the point. To me, that is also part of the reality of where we are right now. It's incredibly complicated. The hopeful part, which is the part that people actually don't want to talk about, is the part that interests me the most.
Yeah. Well, it's the part that's harder to find your way in if it's not intuitive to you, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also is our essential nature, and it is why we do music. And it's why you're all here studying and getting a degree.
But you're talking, so you and I both know, and they all know, that the time and the focus that it takes on your instrument, everybody wants to be so good at their instrument. It's so important because it's so competitive, and if you have any, but there's so much more that goes with it today in order to be, if you want to be successful and find your own way. How do you talk to people about balancing and letting yourself explore those things and feel the freedom to do it and develop the flexibility to do it? Because for some people it's more intuitive than others, and it's not necessarily natural for everybody.
Yeah, although I do think that curiosity is natural. I think it's beaten out of a lot of us, most of us, and I think a lot of educational programs and dogmas shut it down rather than activating it and nourishing it. But I think it is natural. I think, and how you balance the necessity of practicing the number of hours that we need to practice to master our instruments. And I like to think of it as just being a human, belonging to a world outside of the concert hall, the practice room, and our wonderful but quite myopic way as musicians of looking at the world. Necessary to develop our craft. But again, it's like the seeing with both eyes thing. I don't believe, I happen to be one of these people who doesn't believe that, practicing 8 hours a day and doing nothing else that activates a creative mind is a path. I think that's abuse. I think it's horrible. And yet, that's the way a lot of us were either implicitly or explicitly trained. And the truth is, anybody who plays, who is devoted enough to spend 8 hours a day in a practice room, has a curious mind. And I think it's less a question of balance. We can talk about balance. We talked about that a little bit last night. We even talked about some practice techniques and got into the tactical nature of it. But I think more broadly, it's about knowing that there's this time that you spend in the studio, and there's this time you spend on your craft. A lot of it involves imitation, replication, things that we need to do to develop a musculature, right? And there's the rest of this wonderful time that we have in the world doing everything from reading things to talking to people to having our minds blown by ideas that are different from ours to meeting people that are completely different and see the world differently than we do. These things do not happen in isolation. One is constantly informing the other, and one is constantly, if we're in check with it, nourishing the other. And that's why I don't buy it that musicians need to be dumb. I don't buy it that musicians need to be out of touch with the world, with politics, with their social responsibility, with the ethics of how people are paid and why people are paid and what kind of world they want to live and make work in. I know that that's not always a popular belief, but that happens to be mine.
So I want to ask you, music, I suppose, not necessarily, but in part is based on people sitting and listening to it and experiencing it. Mm-hmm. So in other words, having an audience. What do you think that means today? And what do you think audiences relate to?
I think it's really simple. I think audiences relate to authenticity. They relate to truth. Human beings relate to authenticity and truth. This is what people are looking for. Whether you are playing Baroque music or pop music or free jazz or contemporary music or music for which we do not yet have a name, I believe that that's what people are looking for. Mm-hmm. I think it's that simple.
So finding your own voice.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do that, not in isolation. Sure, we need to spend a lot of time alone to know ourselves and to find our voice. But we learn who we are by being with others, by collaborating with others, by disagreeing with others, by being in dialogue with others, by listening a lot, and by inquiring. And yeah, organization. Well, no, go ahead.
No, so talk a little bit about the evolution towards ICE. And because it really is an extraordinary group, and it's, you do so many interesting things and are branching out to continue to do so many interesting things. And what's fascinating about it, and what is interesting about the quote that I read initially is that you have this sense that there's never a sense of satisfaction where you don't have the answers. You're always looking for new answers. You're always looking to try new things. Nothing gets fixed. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit. I would imagine that's a lot of you in that. And
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways to talk about ICE. In answer to your previous question about audiences and what people are looking for, I started a contemporary music ensemble. It plays weird music. Nobody knew who we were. We were playing music by composers nobody had ever heard of, in venues nobody had ever heard of. And we had a startup budget of like $605 that I had amassed from my holiday catering tips. There was not a business plan going into this. It was just like, I've got these friends, I've got this idea, we need to do this. It really was that simple. Mm-hmm. And it had grown out of a project that we did as students when we were still at Oberlin. And we just said, okay, if we can do this at Oberlin, maybe we can do this in a city. Maybe we can do it in 2 cities. Maybe we could do it in 3. Maybe we wouldn't have to just be based in one place. Maybe we could be based multiple places and create a new economic model so that we could produce our own work and do it multiple locations and not wait for presenters or curators or the gatekeepers of culture and taste to do that for us. We would just find a way to do it for ourselves and for one another. That was the basic impetus. But in the sort of organizational brain answer to your previous question about audiences is that we really wanted, and this is still an aspiration of ICE, we're not there yet, I don't know if we'll ever get there, but like my dream for the organization is that people would come to an ICE concert, or to any concert for that matter, not having any idea what they're going to hear, and going precisely for that reason. And aspects of that dream we've made come true. We have a very loyal following, and we have people who really, they will come, they'll get excited about a particular piece we're playing or about the idea of a project. But the whole way that art is marketed and the way that new music needs to be marketed in order to get people there. How wonderful would it be if we are not living in that interpreted world, but we could create a new interpretation far into the future where people come to a concert precisely because they do not know anything about the experience they're going to have. And they trust this group of people, and they trust each other to go and just free fall and have that experience. How cool would it be if people went to the symphony for that reason?
Yeah. Doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So, that was an original vision.
Yeah.
And, we're 15 years in, and we're not there, and I don't know that we ever will be, but it's fun to imagine these things.
And I imagine a lot of this was also driven by your passion for music of our time.
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah, to me, there's nothing more exhilarating than being in an ensemble and working with a composer who is just shaping something from stardust with us, and seeing this miracle take place, and then wanting to get out there and share it with people. And ICE has done something shy of 700 world premieres in our last decade and a half, and like we were talking about last night, it's not as if every single one of those is a gem and is going to enter the canon. We don't even know what the canon is. We're going to all be dead by the time the canon is determined. So, talk about wasting time within an interpreted world. Let's just do the work that we believe in, and let history and.
But then you're partly the sieve through
absolutely.
Which it flows. That's
absolutely. Yeah.
So. Again, you're talking to a group of students that are going to be going out into the world soon, and what are the? We're talking a lot about this issue here about what it means to get ready to enter the professional world, and these folks have heard me talk a lot about how conventional conservatories are and have been, and that sort of the things that we're talking about are dealt with at the periphery, if at all, and so we're on a journey of how to really integrate that into their experience here. And I guess what I want to ask you is, what do you think? You talked about authenticity, and I think that's a great answer. But what do you think, even beyond that, are the essential skills of survival today?
I think
not just survival, but actually a chance to prosper.
I think curiosity. I think the collaborative muscle that we talked about last night in class, which is not something it's not a skill that you just develop and then you have it and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to flex this and I can make anything.
What do you mean by that?
I mean the ability to work with other people. Even a solo pianist, the greatest solo pianist, the greatest solo violinist, has to deal with people. And I think there's this misconception that, once you've reached a certain level of proficiency on your instrument, well, then you can start and do interesting things. I just think that's terrible. We should be doing interesting things that interest us all along. And schools should be a place where those things are nurtured alongside all of the motor skills that we absolutely need to develop. But in terms of skills, you can tell I have an allergic reaction to the word skill, because I don't really, at ICE, you read our non-organizational manual, which is that we make it up every day. We're not doing our job if we're just applying 10 skills that we'd learned last week, today, in service of this new piece of music. The new piece of music is asking us to develop a whole bunch of new skills that we're going to learn together. So we also approach our organization that way. We have programs and we have a budget and we have some structure, but we're also constantly reinventing what that structure is.
But there's some pretty smart strategic framework behind all of that.
There is, but I mean, okay, I'm just going to keep the frame wide before we go granular again. I mean, another thing that Paulo Freire said that had a big influence on me is that when the structure doesn't permit dialogue, the structure needs to change. And you know, if you apply that to your time at school, well, it's really interesting. It's actually a very practical thing to think about. If you apply that to a collaboration, a composer-performer collaboration that you're stuck with, or if you apply that to, you know, a band you're trying to create, or if you apply that to your own internal dialogue with a masterwork that you are trying to see through and make your own, that can be a very useful skill. So to me, it's not like, here are the 10 things that you need to know how to do so that when you get out there, everything's going to be okay. I think if I said that to you, I couldn't live with myself because I'd be lying. Because I actually don't know the skills that you will need when you leave here. They're going to be different than the ones I have developed, and you're going to need different ones a year after that. And that is, my friends, the good news and the bad news. I think it's mostly good news. But it's also very difficult. The bad part of it is that, like, no, there isn't an easy answer. And you know, as a teacher, I do.
But somewhere in that answer is probably certainly curiosity and probably flexibility.
Curiosity, flexibility, and you know, persistence. It sounds really boring, but you guys all know what persistence is. You wouldn't have gotten in here if you didn't know what that was. It's not as if that goes away when you leave school and have amassed a certain skill level. It definitely doesn't go away when you've achieved quote unquote success, another word that I've sort of banned. But you know, once you've won something or you know gotten a bunch of great reviews or whatever, it doesn't have a smell or taste. You have to go back to your essential self, which is fueled by your curiosity and your own persistence and your desire to discover things. And I mean, those are actually the skills that I think are most important to develop while we're in school. And the collaborative muscle is, you know, it's in there too. It's not something that's talked about because it's like, oh, there are people who like to work together and are good at working together and people who don't. No, the truth is we all need to work together. We need to get better at working together. And every time we collaborate, we will beef up that collaborative muscle, whether it's a successful or unsuccessful collaboration.
Do you think musicians have to change the way they think?
I think musicians who've been brought up in a very conservative classical music tradition would be served by widening the frame a little bit, yes. I don't think I'm just talking about people who do weird music. I mean, that is my field. But I do think that we could learn more from each other if we get out of our little siloed places.
So I want to get to some questions, but before we do, I want to ask you, so you talked about, you know, weird music. So what do you think is the state of new music today?
I think it's tremendously hopeful. You know, I was here, I don't know how many of you were here for the New Music Gathering that happened. I mean, what an awesome, totally grassroots, fun, diverse, optimistic, you know, complicated. There were some difficult conversations that happened, some contentious conversations. Again, that to me is the sign of a really well put together gathering, kind of anti-conference. You know, if we're all agreeing about something, nobody's doing their job. They created a structure that was big enough for real dialogue to happen. And you know, it's 4 composers who got together and said, let's do this. And that's the beginning of every quote-unquote movement, whether it's a garage band that has a couple of shows that they love playing a year, or whether it's, you know, an empire. Everything starts that way. And I think that momentum that we witnessed at the New Music Gathering, I think that is a seed that is growing exponentially. It's starting to flower, not just in big cities in the US, but you know, places like the Black House Music Collective in Kansas City, run by a fantastic young man named Hunter Long. I think one of the most inspiring examples of just an artist-run collective. Very few resources, just making it happen, producing operas, commissioning operas, doing them in weird spaces, making it happen, creating cross-cultural collaborations between Montreal and Kansas City. I mean, just wild stuff. What's happening in Baltimore, what's happening in Pittsburgh. You know, this is not just about LA and New York and Chicago anymore. And frankly, I think, you know, and I love all 3 of those places, but I think that they're less interesting than what's happening in smaller places. And I think the state of music for that reason is tremendously hopeful. That does not mean that we're done. And it doesn't mean that we have enough resources. We don't. I mean, a place like Black House Music Collective, they need resources. Yeah. They need money. They're doing work that opera companies 300 times their size don't have the guts to do. Mm-hmm. So there again, it's the good news and the bad news. But my job, which I love, is to focus on the good news and to do whatever I can as a member of this community to turn those seeds into just outrageous weird flowers.
Do you compose?
No, I'm a terrible composer.
So
I write songs every now and then, but I don't show them to anybody. Yeah. It's good to, you know thyself. I'm a terrible composer.
Very important. It's important. So let's get other folks involved, actually, because I know people have questions for you, and it's I want to give people a chance. Right over here. But let's get a microphone, because I think that we have stuff going on online, so people can hear you.
Hi. My name's Alan. I'm a conducting major here, and I have two questions. One, which can be pretty open-ended, I guess, so as much as you can get to. One of them is, I studied with Alan Pearson up in New York and everything, and he's very inspiring, all that stuff. But one of the things I also learned was that, starting a contemporary ensemble these days is sort of like, there's a lot of them out there. It's hard to, whereas like maybe 20 years ago it would have been a little more singular. Now it's just sort of you're one of the new ensembles, and you have a very small chance of sort of making it, if you will. So what kind of advice would you go for as far as going down that path? I mean, and not just being the regular Perot ensemble who is trying to do something with that. And then the second one is you refer to a lot of mindfulness practices, Sanskrit. And I'm just wondering if you have any sort of mindful practices of your own, whether it's yoga or something else that you apply to your own music, because you sort of seem like you would. Just that kind of mind.
Thank you.
Which I hope is a compliment.
Thank you. Those are two very, very different questions, but great questions. So let me tackle the first one first, because it's harder. The first part of your question, I want to challenge an assumption there first, which is that there are so many contemporary music ensembles, why would you make another one? And I'm going to give you something super cheesy. I mean, I'm from California, and I was just there. So I've got like the Californian hippie cheese factor just all over me. So I'm just going to say, just continuing the flower analogy, would you say the same thing about in urban areas, let's say, for example, a bunch of people are planting roof gardens, and there's like there's all this green stuff, all this flowers happening. Would you say like, oh, this just no, stop with the flowers, too many flowers. No. So when you say, I mean, I have to point that out because it breaks my heart a little bit to hear a young person say, yeah, but there's all these contemporary music ensembles over, the world's so crowded. Bullshit. We need you. We need you, and we need whatever weird idea fuels you. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a Pierrot ensemble. There's plenty of fantastic music still to be written for the Pierrot ensemble. It's something that never interested me because so much had been done for it already. And so when I started ICE, I just said, well, anything but Pierrot. Let's get a tuba in there. Let's get a couple of bassoons in there. Let's get a, harmonium. Let's get an accordion. Let's have some plucked cactuses. So, which is not to say don't do Pierrot. I mean, there's amazing music written for it, and I'm sure you composers in here, you've got things that you can do to explode that form. But my answer would be a question back to you, like what moves you the most? What instrumental combination is most exciting for you to conduct? What size and what repertoire? And if the repertoire doesn't exist, then who would you want to commission as your first project? While you're here in school and you've got composers who would probably love to write for a dedicated group of musicians.
Which is happening. It's great.
Awesome. So, I mean, my advice would be, first of all, challenge those assumptions. And don't be anti-flower, man. And just do it, I mean, I often hear people say, oh, I'm going to do this once I've done X, Y, and Z. Like, I'm going to really follow my own heart and my own ambition, and I'm going to, do this thing that I really want to do once I, can play the Vinyavsky standing on my head, or whatever. No, just do it. Just do it now, and if you love it, and if you are persistent with it, and collaborative and flexible with it, it will inform everything else that you're doing. So just do it. As far as the other question, I do have a meditation practice, and I run every day, and I do it mostly for my mind, just because this business we're in it's intense, and when you start traveling a lot too, and I'm on the road most of the year, I have to have a couple of things that are fixed. You know, a couple rituals in the morning and in the evening that are the same, because everything else in my life is just completely different every day. Yeah. And the environment's different, and I'm very committed to my life being that much of an evolving thing, I mean, for all the reasons we talked about, both in my organizational work and in my creative work. So whatever that is for you, you know, for all musicians, I think it's really essential to have some kind of practice that brings attention to the way that we're using these hard-working muscles, the way we're rebalancing them at the beginning and end of a session or a day, and something that just gets our mind out of whatever small place it's ended up in when we're thinking about the same thing over and over again.
Thank you. Other questions? Over here? Oh, we got one over here, and then we'll go over there.
Hi, my name is Ben Buchanan. I'm an alumni of the graduate composition program here. Thank you for your time here. I wasn't there last night, unfortunately, but you have a message and a career of hope, which is very inspiring to hear. In passing, you mentioned your take that a musician doesn't need to be out of touch with politics, out of touch with their social responsibility. And I was wondering if you could speak to how your perception of a musician's social responsibility has directed part of your life and your career. And I'm asking this as someone who can get like bogged down by that side of things.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, for me, we could talk about this all day. I have a lot to say on the subject, but the specific question about how that informed my work and the organization I created it's really simple. I just, when I started ICE, it was because there was no other way that this phenomenal group of people who wanted to do this beautiful and miraculous thing together could do it unless we did it for each other. And there is, that is, in a sense, it's an act of taking social responsibility for something that just will not be done for you otherwise. And, you know, throughout ICE's evolution, we've continued to reinvent ourselves and continued to interrogate our programs and make sure that they still have relevance. And when they don't, we just cancel them, lovingly. I mean, we just, and when a quote unquote business model, and we like to call it a modality because it's always changing at ICE, isn't working and is not an agent of change, we cancel it. We do away with it. So that's been something that's been ongoing since the very beginning, and it's something that I believe fiercely in. I mean, I think it's impossible to be a musician today and to be unaware of what's going on around us. And I think it's not impossible, but I would not advise being a musician today and not knowing anything about the environment that you've been asked to play in, whether it's the budget size of the organization, where the money comes from, how it's being spent. You know, at ICE, we just decided, okay, we're going to take total responsibility for all of this. We're going to have transparency. We're going to pay everybody exactly the same. I'm doing a project with ICE next week. I'm getting paid the same as the fourth trombone player. I'm incredibly proud of that. I'm incredibly proud to be a part of an organization that has that kind of ethical pay structure and completely simple, transparent pay structure. I mean, it actually saves so much time. There's no negotiating. Everybody's getting paid the same. Our administrative salaries for the leading artist partners at ICE, 6, now 7 musicians who are embedded in different areas of organizational work, in development and fundraising and education, and in my case, programming and overseeing the artistic direction. We all make the same salary. We all have the same scale. There's no like, oh, because I've been here longer, I make more money, or because I'm Claire, I make more. No, like everybody is paid the same. And that is, to me, like that's an act of social responsibility for the people that I work with. It's also a political statement that we have decided to operate that way. And ICE is in the process of actually opening up. We're creating this database that we spoke about a little bit last night, the ICE Commons, which will be a kind of wiki score library, crowdsourced. And we also created a database called Luigi, named after Luigi Nono and his socialist practices, that shows the internal workings of ICE. All the financial information, all the personnel decisions, all this stuff. So to make that available to the public as a resource, as for young ensembles who are starting out, who need help figuring out like how these pieces fit together, and also for the world of classical music, which is not an equitable world, financially, politically, socially, in a lot of ways. That's part of the world is sort of a disaster part of the original question. I think the best way that we can change that is by taking responsibility for our own communities, however small or large, and being active participants of change in them. So, does that make sense? There's a lot more to say, and there's a lot more specifics. I think it's actually really important to talk about specifics when we talk about this stuff, because it's really easy to philosophize, but it's another thing entirely to say, this is how people are paid, and this is why. This is why we believe in this, and when you get on stage, you want to know what the environment is that you're a part of.
I want to follow up on one thing you said in answering the question, which was really interesting to me, when you said that you don't, essentially what you were saying is you don't let falling in love with an idea necessarily drive whether you continue that idea if something's not working. And I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of businesses have trouble with that.
Yeah.
With that concept. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you all there have mastered that concept is,
I don't know if we've mastered it.
Well, but I mean,
it's,
the fact that I mean, I think that's unusual. It's very hard for organizations.
It is
really hard.
It is, and I mean, it can be exasperating. I know I'm talking about it. It sounds like, oh, it's really fun, but the truth is, every day there's a whole bunch of crises and a whole bunch of things to figure out that are really frustrating and demoralizing. Yep. And most of the time, the powers that be, whether they're foundations or institutions that we're hoping to work with and partner with on a project that we really believe in, usually involving a composer who's not known yet and who's not going to sell tickets yet. We're mostly shut down. We're mostly told that the things we want to do are not possible. That is most of the time. There's I would say 90% of the time. But that's where the social responsibility thing comes in. And if you get a group of people who develop the collaborative muscle to say yes to their ideas and say the rest of the world, the larger institutions, the people with the quote-unquote power, they're going to catch up to us. But right now we need to do what's right by our people, and we need to see this idea through. It might suck, but you know what? There's only one way to find out.
I think we had another question over here, and then one over here.
Hi, Claire. I'm Zach. I'm a third-year undergraduate horn player here, and I wanted you to talk a little bit more about some audience development stuff that you've done with ICE, because back at the New Music Gathering, I attended a panel on the economics of new music, and I got a lot of differing opinions on what audience development is like, and none of them struck me as particularly optimistic. And I've taken the business of music class and everything here, and it seems that's a very optimistic viewpoint. But I wanted to know specifically how it was tailored to new music, because you talked a little bit earlier about how people are afraid to kind of take that plunge into hearing something that they don't know what it's going to be like. And I mean, that contradicts principles of use value and everything. People don't like things that they can't get a concrete use from. So I was just wondering about the things that you've done with your organization that have kind of worked to break that boundary and kind of grow the community of new music and show it to people who have never experienced it before.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'll start by saying, and you can probably predict that I'm going to say this, that I have the same allergic reaction to skills-based teaching as I do to audience development, audience engagement, cultivation, as I do to networking. I mean, these things, they don't mean anything. And people, teach classes on them, they write books on them, they make money off of telling people how to do these things, and I think most of it is totally irrelevant. So I prefer to think of audience development in terms of what kind of community are you building around what you do. And there are so many ways to answer that question. There's so many ways for an individual to answer that question, for an organization to answer that question. And the answers are going to change daily. So at ICE, and I'll give you a list of things that we have done, by no means comprehensive, but these are things that really have activated the building of a community around what we do. And the first thing we did in the very beginning when we had no money was give free concerts. And people said, you're completely insane. You're already broke. You're self-funding these concerts with your catering tips, and you're not paying your musicians because you don't have any money, because all the catering tips went to renting the chairs, and you're giving free concerts. You're out of your mind. And I said, no, actually, I think this is completely sane. Nobody knows who we are. I'm so interested to see who will come to a concert that we give in a Greek bar on the west side of Chicago. If there's no cover, I'm so interested to see what will happen if we play Xenakis there. I'm so interested to see what will happen if we play a totally obtuse program of pieces by young composers that nobody's ever heard of in a church basement, in the Unitarian church on the south side of Chicago. I'm totally curious to see what's going to happen if we do a public concert in the park that's just only 15 minutes long, but it's just rockin' and baller. Who are those people? What are they going to say afterwards? If they hate it, how can we talk to them about why they hate it? And how can we be interested in why they hate it? Not so we're going to change it, but just so that we know who they are. And we started producing festivals that were all free. We call them Ice Fests. And they started with 3 concerts in 3 different areas of Chicago. They were always packed. The audiences were effortlessly diverse and ranged from university professors to homeless people to a lot of music students, architecture students, and just random passers-by and people who just wanted the free beer. And so we grew that idea. We grew that into a festival. I think the last time we did an Ice Fest, it was 11 consecutive nights in 11 different neighborhoods, featuring 11 different site-specific premieres in 11 different Chicago neighborhoods. Every single one of them was free. And so over the course of those 11 days, the press couldn't ignore us, even though we were still tiny. So everybody had to write about what we were doing. And everybody had to come. And so all of a sudden, we had built our community. We had built the seedlings of our community. And so, that was one of the earliest things that we did. ICE has always given free concerts. It's something I love. I love what happens when you just have no idea who's going to show up. And I love people's reactions, even if they just say, I hated that. That was horrible. I think it's fantastic. Like, again, if the space is not big enough for that kind of dialogue, then we gotta change the size of the space. So we actually recently, last year, decided that we really missed those free concerts. And we've been doing free concerts, but it wasn't like we didn't have the same fire that we had early on. And we had canceled the Ice Fests, by the way, because they had been so successful that we decided it was time to do something else.
Is that what you do when something is really successful?
Well, yeah, when other organizations start doing it,
Oh, okay.
then that's great. We're like, great, so we don't have to do it anymore. Let's do something else.
Okay.
But so we a year ago got together and we asked ourselves that same question. How are we going to build ICE's community in our second decade? What's that going to look like? And so we started a program that's called Open Ice. And it's an outpouring of free and open to the public concerts. I think we're doing like 60 this year, all over the world, different places. A lot of community centers, public libraries. So like our founding violinist, Dave Bolin, one of my favorite string players ever alive, will get up and play, Sciarrino and Bach and Berio in a public library and blow people's minds. So we have just reinvested in that. What's new about the strategy, if you can call it that now, is that we're merging Open Ice with Digitice, which is our sort of digital concert hall platform. So we have about 500 videos on Digitice right now of live performances, not edited. It's high quality audio and multi-camera shoot. But even if it's like Dave Bolin playing in a public library in Edgewater and 5 people show up whose minds are blown, it's then online. That's archived online, and of course tens of thousands of people can have access to it that way. So we've also, Open Ice is, sort of a 3-pronged thing. You can see the diagram on our website, but it's free and open to the public, live experiences, Digitice for the online engagement, and then all of our educational programs that are connected with both of those. So the idea is that none of these things happens in isolation. So those are some ways that we've dealt with the audience development question, but I would just encourage you to think about it in terms of community. And you know what? If 5 people come, that's awesome. That's awesome. We're doing 12 shows at the Stone this week, and you never really know who's going to show up. Like, a couple of the shows were completely packed. We had another show, it was a 10 p.m. set a few nights ago. Our violist played a world premiere by John Zorn. He played Penderecki, Hindemith, and Bach. It was just an unbelievable program. And there were about 11 people there. And you know what? That's great. That's great. Next week, we're going to play at the Park Avenue Armory, and we've sold like 8,000 tickets. These two things are not in opposition to one another. They're actually necessary. So I could talk about that all day, but that gives you some ideas, I hope.
Wonderful. Back over here.
Hi, Hi there. My name's Adam. I'm an alumnus too. I'm a percussionist, and I graduated 5 years ago. And just a quick nod to Dean Bronstein. I think it's really great when your alumni feel that they should have gone to school 5 years later. So, nicely done. Yeah. But my question is more specifically about ICE's modularity and its artist-drivenness. Were these two things that kind of started from the very beginning of ICE, or if not, when did they come in and why did they come in? And if it was from the beginning, was it hard to implement that? Because I feel like it's a lot of trust you have to put in all these 30 people that, yeah, if your solo violist is giving a show, that he's giving it or he's adhering to the same ICE ideals that a 20-piece ensemble is going to adhere to at Park Avenue Armory or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, there's a
Great question.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there. The answer to the first one is that yes, this was a value, if you could say, from the very beginning. The idea of being modular and the idea of being driven from within. I mean, speaking of inspiration from within, we wanted the organizational model to be that, and for every member to be able to participate creatively and also responsibly in that. So that's the second question, I think, was, has that been hard? Did you ever come across difficulties? Oh my God, all the time. And it's still a work in progress too. I mean, we like to pride ourselves on saying that we're an artist-driven organization, and we are, but we also have an incredibly talented administrative staff. We have a new executive director, who I think Vanessa Rose.
Oh, yeah, sure. Vanessa was a fellow of mine, actually, in Dallas. Yeah.
She's brilliant,
Yeah, she's great. She's terrific.
and we have a very, very hard-working, small but mighty non-artist admin staff. And there again, the idea is not that like there are two camps of these people, or one was working for the other, the creative people, and then you've got the people who would execute the creative ideas. No, it's totally integrated. And so growing into a sane and balanced ecology with all of that is a work in progress. And it's been both difficult and exhilarating at every juncture. But there's no blueprint for that. It's different for every group of people, and we're still messing with the quote unquote model. I mean, I had a conversation with Vanessa yesterday about completely restructuring yet again, which we probably will do. And all of that is welcome change at ICE. But yes, it's difficult. And the third part of your question, remind me?
I think I forgot to. I guess, another part of the question is that why don't you hand some of those off to professionals now or sooner or at all, like grant writing or things like this, the kind of 7 people that you have that are musicians but are also running the administrative side?
Yeah, I mean, for a number of reasons. The first one is that they really enjoy the work. They have elected these positions. They've created these positions. Nobody came to Ross Carr, our percussionist, and said, Ross, we'd like for you to apply for a job creating a digital database, and it's going to be X number of hours a week, and here are the deliverables. No, Ross came to us and said, I basically want to start a business within this business. And it's going to be a money-losing business. And I'm like, well, great, that's the business we're in. I mean, so we got that taken care of. Let's talk about the interesting stuff. What's the idea? And how can this intersect with all this other cool stuff we're doing? And Ross just has created, I mean, you guys should check it out if you haven't. Digitize is amazing, and he's also created the ICE Commons, which is going to be the score counterpart to Digitize, all of which is free and open to the public. So in the case of Ross, in the case of Rebecca, our bassoonist, who's involved in the individual gift side of development, she created that position for herself. She came to us and she said, you know what, we got all these part-time development staff that have come through. We keep on going through them like Kleenex. What if you have a musician out there, speaking of truth and authenticity, sitting in front of somebody who's about to make a major gift to fund an educational program for ICE? What if a member of the ensemble stands in front of them and makes that quote unquote ask? You take an act that is professionalized, and you give it its truest manifestation. So she's created that role for our grant writer Ryan. Also said, you know what? I think I can write about ICE's programs better than anybody we can hire because I'm making them. And he's a fantastic writer, and he's created that position for himself. So that's how it's worked at ICE. That said, none of those things are fixed. And what we'd like to create at ICE is an evolving modality where people can come in and out of roles, they can grow in a certain role, and then when they're done growing there, or they're done growing the thing that they really wanted to grow within the organization, they say, you know what, next I really want to focus on this other aspect of the organization. And so that flexibility and modularity was part of the idea from the beginning. I mean, I never would have thought that I'd be running a $2.5 million organization that played 147 concerts a year. Like, yeah, if you told me that was going to happen 15 years ago, I would have said you're completely out of your mind. But I did envision this kind of environment that for us, it's like the ice Venn diagram is creation, which is, commissioning, creating stuff that people haven't created before, also creating programs. Transmission, which is performance and education. So we don't look at education and performance as separate things. They're absolutely not just equal, but they're integral. And then archive, the creation of an archive, which is the database, it's the score library, it's digitize. And the idea is that all three of these things touch at all times and inform one another at all times. And that diagram is also, it's a model for each individual ICE member's role, that everybody is involved, whether you are the production assistant or whether you're, the solo violinist. You're involved in creation, transmission, and archive at all points. And you decide, which part of the pie you want to emphasize and make the biggest contribution to it at a given time.
What do you guys fight about?
Oh, everything. Everything. Oh, yeah. Everything.
Creative stuff? Or?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's the best stuff, Mm-hmm. I mean, I come into an ICE meeting about a program or a problem or both, and I come out, the best ICE meetings, I come out having my mind completely changed about everything. Like the definition of a meeting is not like me walking in and saying, this is my vision for this program, and let's execute it. Here are the marching orders. Boom, 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 boom. Like, that's so boring. Also, I could never get away with that at ICE. Everyone would just be like, shut up, Claire. I have a better idea. And you know what? Most of the time they do. So, yeah, we disagree all the time. And that's part of what makes it real.
That's great. But lots of questions.
When commissioning new music, are you generally approaching that like you've heard a piece or someone in the ensemble has heard a piece by a composer and you want to have them write a piece, or is it more like you have an ensemble or a program you're wanting to do and you want a piece that fits that, so then you look for a composer who can write that piece for you best?
Truthfully, it's all of the above. Sometimes commissions come in like a very formal way, very, very infrequently, I should say, when an institution comes to us and says, we want to commission something for the large ensemble. I mean, that's happened, 4 times in our entire life. So that's why we haven't waited around for institutions to do that for us. Usually, it's much more organic. And sometimes it's a group of musicians who have just been following a particular composer and say, we've got to do something with this person. That's I would say the majority of the time, that's what happens. There's several people who just fall in love, and they say, I want you guys to fall in love too. And we usually do. Recently, we've decided to actually create a third strain of commissioning, which we're calling micro commissions. And the idea that, these are like the pieces that we used to all just do for the love of it all the time, and you'd have a piece written for you by a friend, and you premiere it like 2 weeks later. And it's not like a huge contract, and there isn't like a co-presenter. It's just like, here's a pot of money that we can have available for every musician of ICE, so that when those ideas happen, they can be caught like right in their spark, and they can be manifested. We don't have to wait for some bureaucratic organizational, gatekeeping checkoff list to act on a really great idea. So that's it's like we created a fund. It's called the Micro ICE Commissioning Fund. And the idea is that, with 35 members of the group, you've got a lot of creative minds out there who are researching different things. Everybody in the group is a soloist in their own right and plays in other bands and is doing other things. And they're exposed to different types of music and to so many different composers and so many different aesthetics. And so I think for me, part of the richness of ICE is what I learn from those other 34 people, what they bring back to the group in terms of their discoveries. So we're in the process right now of trying to formalize that. I hope that in the process of formalizing, we don't kill it. But we've created a fund, and actually used some of the first year of my MacArthur to start that fund, so that we could see these pieces just come to life, and we wouldn't have to wait for them. We are actually doing, for Lincoln Center's 50th anniversary, this summer, mostly Mozart Festival. We're doing 50 premieres in August. And more than half of them are these micro commission funds. And the youngest composer will be 14, and the oldest 98. So it's going to be a very diverse group of people.
We had another one over here, yeah.
Hi. So you talked about doing site-specific work and also about giving back to the community. So could you just explain, how do you go about finding like a specific connection between the work you're doing and the place or places that you're doing it? And then also when you commission composers, how do you kind of bring them in and share that vision with them as they're making the work?
Two fantastic questions. The first one is that, I'm sure this has happened to you guys. You walk into a space, like a beautiful space or a weird space, and you think, oh, I have to do this particular piece of music here, or I need to play here. Like that happens. I mean, that happens to me all of the time, and sometimes those ideas are good, and sometimes they flop. But I mean, in the very earliest days of ICE, when I was a full-time caterer, and I was working for all these different catering companies, and I didn't know Chicago at the time. I had just moved there. But it was an amazing way to get to know the city because I went to all these spaces. I mean, we did events at the zoo. I catered weddings and funerals and, bar mitzvahs and outdoor things and indoor things. And I discovered all these museums. And, most of those places ended up being ICE venues. So, I mean, it really can be that random. Actually, I think it should be that random. But, sometimes it happens the other way. Sometimes the space inspires the program idea or the commission idea. And sometimes it's a piece of music that is just not going to come alive in a concert hall. Or it's not going to come alive in a dead black box theater, which is the place that you have available for it. And so there's a programming dance that happens. I mean, there's, I would say thousands of little micro decisions that are made every day at ICE about where we want to place these little children of ours so that they can have the best possible environment. And it really, really depends. The second question about how do we involve composers in that, we started this program, ICE Lab, in 2010. It was a 4-year program that we then canceled when it got really successful in 2014. We didn't cancel it. We just said ICE Lab was a program. It was 4 years long. And we decided to turn the noun ICE Lab into a verb and just say that now we don't have ICE Lab the program, we just ICE Lab everything that we do. So what ICE Lab is a laboratory for young composers to work in very, very close collaboration with members of ICE from the inception of an idea. So it's just blowing apart this idea that people write music here and people play music here and then they come together, 2.5 days before the concert and everyone's unhappy and the piece is never played again. Great business model. Thank you, classical music industry. That makes sense for everybody. Thank you. Everybody loses. So we're like, how can we just blow this open and do this in a way that is way more fun? It's way more collaborative, and we're going to be creating work that we really, really love, and that's going to have legs, too. So we created ICE Lab. We invited 24 composers over 4 years to create whatever crazy project they wanted to create with musicians of ICE. And one of the things we asked in the very beginning was, where do you imagine this piece being played? And it was interesting. The question stumped some composers. It irritated some composers. It really creatively activated others. But in the end, we said, this is part of this program. We need to figure this out. This is not, producer, fictitious producer, like ICE is the producer, But it's not this unreal other is going to make these decisions for you and then we can all sit around and complain when the concert hall isn't adequate. No, it's like, this is our social responsibility. We're going to figure this out together. So we had a lot of really interesting conversations over the course of the program. I mean, talk about developing a collaborative muscle. All the composers we worked with and everybody in ICE, through a lot of difficult conversations, developed the collaborative muscle to navigate these conversations and to find the right place for work. So, I mean, if you look on the website, you can see kind of the whole history of ICE Lab and how these pieces and their spaces, the spaces that they were housed in, emerged. And by the end of it, the spaces got weirder and weirder. We did a piece by Anna Thorvaldsdottir, one of our last year ICE Lab composers, in a geodesic dome in Iceland. We did another one in Greenland on kayaks. We did it in Alvin Lucier installation, at the MCA in public spaces, not in the galleries. So, it's a complex answer to your question, but it's about that dialogue, and developing the muscle around being able to really flesh that dialogue out. But either can inspire, like the space can be like, oh, this is going to give birth to an idea, or the piece can be like, oh, this is going to give birth to a space.
In classical Athens, members of the polis who became too popular within the city would actually be ostracized for a period of 10 years. The idea being you are sort of at peak contribution in order to maintain the development of others, as well as fresh ideas, that you had to leave the city for a time. So my question for you is, in what ways do you leave your city, meaning ICE, in order to develop your creativity in other areas? And then also, in what ways, as a musician, do you pursue other interests that in turn eventually come back to your music?
What a fantastic question. Yeah, it's wonderful. And in ICE, and I've said this from the very beginning, what I wanted to create was not a founder-driven organization. I wanted to create an organization that could just completely thrive on its own and render me totally irrelevant. And we're getting there. Like, I am way less necessary at ICE. There are so many creative people making decisions and creating programs and just being awesome that as Mama ICE, I'm really not. They don't need me so much anymore. And so I have been able to sort of take my leave and go other places and like every member of the group, bring those findings back. And it's been a very, very long process, but it's a really exciting one. And
How does that feel?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, it's difficult, like all wonderful things are. Mm-hmm. But it's the point, I mean, as they say, life is short, art is long. The point is not to, the point is not to attach ourselves to things. The point is to activate them to the point that they can really flower and then be released. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Wait, there was a part 2 of the question.
Well, I suppose, could you give examples of things that you do, if there's work outside of ICE that you find that there are kind of smaller organizations or other things where you are able to do musical activities which you wouldn't actually be able to do in ICE, although of course ICE is, the essence of it is so that you could do essentially anything. But so I do, one part of that is I wonder if there's anything outside of ICE that you find that can't be found within it. But also if there are other endeavors that you do, say like you wanted to pursue kayaking. In order to do that to its fullest extent as a musician, you would maybe have to take a month off from playing and to just sort of go and do this thing and then come back. And so
That sounds great. Totally impractical, but that sounds awesome. But no, in all seriousness, the first part of your question, I mean, the simplest answer is that the Density 2036 project that I started is not at all an ICE project. I've been very, very, very careful to separate the work that I do, as a flute soloist from the work that the ensemble does, because the ensemble's work is about the ensemble. I never wanted to create like a Daniel Barenboim, with all due respect, but a situation where the founder is up there conducting, playing concerti, and using it as a vehicle for a solo career. That's not the point of ICE. The point of ICE, we're a band, we're a community, and we're a band. And so I created the Density 2036 project. And it actually has its own 501c3 and its own whole just other arm of operations, so that it could be separate, and so that both things could learn from one another. So that project for me is it's 22 years long. I'm only a few years into it right now, but it's my main focus outside of ICE. The other things that I've been able to explore more since we've had more core administrative leadership at ICE, and since Vanessa Rose, she's absolutely brilliant as a leader, has come on to take over a good part of what I used to be doing, I've been able to do more teaching, which I really enjoy. For me, the energy of teaching and the energy of running an organization is very, very similar. It uses the same parts of my brain place and my heart place, and is teaching something I've always loved doing, but I have never had time because I was running an organization. And I have more time to do that now, and it's really enriching for me. I mean, even just the 2 hours that I spent with you guys last night was just so fun. So yeah, maybe kayaking is next. I don't know. I only did it once and I capsized and it was demoralizing.
Other questions? So where do you think ICE is going to be 25 years from now?
No idea. Absolutely no idea. And I love that I don't have any idea.
So you have no fantasy about what it might be?
I have all kinds of
Well,
fantasies.
so what are the fantasies about what it might be?
Well, I mean, as we said in the beginning of this conversation, I fantasize about creating a community of people who come to not just ICE concerts, but who come to contemporary music concerts specifically because they don't know what they're going to hear. And to do that, and I think that will take 25 years. To do that, this is not about reconditioning, strategizing about existing classical music audiences like Snoozeville. No, this is about public education starting before kindergarten. And how we are, I mean, speaking of social responsibility, how all of us in this room are going to take responsibility for the fact that we do not have arts in our public education programs. That's how we're going to create the community that we want to have coming to our concerts. And that's going to take at least 25 years. But I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about what ICE is doing, even as a small organization in its modest ways to affect change. And with our education programs, and you mentioned Entice, which we didn't get to, but ways that we're able to plant some seeds that we hope will fully flower a decade or 2 or 3 or 4 from now. That excites me very much. I would love to see ICE have impact as a force for educational and social change as much as it has impact as a force for artistic change, and for these things to be thought of much more holistically. That's also going to take at least a quarter of a century. But those are the things I fantasize about.
So let me ask you, so you're talking about social change, and we're having this conversation here now. I mean, classical music is a world that has a real diversity problem.
Majorly.
Yeah, majorly. What are your thoughts on that?
It is all of our responsibility to address that. Big organizations, small organizations, schools, people who are anti-school, all of us. Mm-hmm. Like, we all have to address it. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the major points of inspiration behind Open ICE and reinstating this public access program. It was just a natural outgrowth of us when we were starting a band and had no idea what we were doing. And we were like, yeah, free concerts, lots of cool people from lots of different walks of life, different educational, different economic backgrounds. And we got busy for about 10 years, and that wasn't as privileged as other things in the organization. We said last year, we need to address this, and this is one way of doing it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's everybody's responsibility. It's not like one entity is going to take this on and fix it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also essential to the future, I think, for our audiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had a question, maybe talk about the integration of the classical world and the improvised music world, maybe the benefits and the importance of that.
Yeah, it's a great question and something we're passionate about. The same way that we don't see any of these things as separate. We don't see the music we're creating that we're calling contemporary music, and let's please come up with another name for it. I mean, it's just, I'm so tired of that, as different at all from the rich tradition of improvised music. I mean, we're talking about music here. So I would say like a good half of what ICE does is not notated. And we've had the great fortune of having people like Peter Evans, Corey Smythe, Dan Peck, who identified first as improvisers and identified, later in their development and in their careers as contemporary musicians or contemporary classical musicians. That's the worst. We got to do away with that. Contemporary classical. It's like, what does that mean?
It's awful.
But it's awful.
Really awful, yeah,
But can we just be musicians? Can we just, But the three of them, when they joined the group, had a major impact on the way that we were thinking about programming improvised music alongside notated music. And the idea that there are spaces for improvised music and then there are spaces for contemporary music, that's so boring. Or there are programs that are just improvised music and there are programs that are just contemporary music. I mean, sure, you can create compelling programs in both spheres, but do they have to be separated? And so we have spent a lot of time just challenging that assumption by putting a piece of Jason Eckhart next to an improvisation by Peter Evans, next to an open form piece that we've coached with George Lewis, next to a completely different, like utterly different aesthetically, open form piece by Paulina Valeros, you know, and a piece by Messiaen and Books to Huda. Like, that's a nice program. And playing with it in lots and lots of different ways. But I think one of the most exciting things about our generation is that we are finally getting away from this idea that there are people who improvise, and there are people who compose, and there are people who perform, and there are people who produce, and there are people who get people there. It's like, no, we're actually all responsible for knowing about all of these things, and then we figure out what hybrid we are going to become. But I think every musician needs to learn how to improvise the same way that we all need to learn how to play in tune. And that is the history. This is not a new idea. This is the history of music. We just got real sidetracked for about 125 years.
Really true. Really true.
You seem like a very well-rounded person, and you seem very well-read, and you seem to know a lot about philosophies and just like mindsets. And I was wondering if there are any books you would really encourage all of us to read so we can also aspire to be like very informed. Because I mean, yeah, you just seem to.
I can send you my reading list. It's very long.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to free associate and tell you, I mean, this is actually what's on my list right now, the things that are really inspiring me. So speaking of George Lewis and of the history of creative music and improvised music and artist-run collectives, his book, A Power Stronger Than Itself, which is the history of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, it's a must-read. I mean, it should be required in every conservatory, every university, not just for music students, but for people just studying human history, people interested in social change, in social responsibility, people just interested in love. It's an amazing, amazing book. So I would say start with that. George Lewis is, I mean, he's one of my heroes, and he's influenced my thinking and ICE's thinking a lot. So, I mean, anything that you can get your hands on by this guy is a must-read. I'm reading a book by Liz Lerman right now, who is a Baltimore native. She's a fantastic teacher, choreographer, activist, just magical being. And anything by Liz is worth reading. And she's a local hero here, too. But in terms of, I mean, I can give you a list so long, but in terms of two people whose work is absolutely relevant to all the questions that were asked today, I would start with those two.
Is there a book in you?
I'm not much of a writer.
No?
Maybe someday, after kayaking.
What do you say and how do you react to people, even people in authority, who tell you that your ideas aren't good and your music isn't music, and that you should dwell in that 125 years where we didn't improvise?
Well, I mean, I'm human, so every time I'm knocked down, I feel like a human feels. Knocked down, and then angry, and then defiant, and defensive. And that space is very small. And so I recognize that space is really small and let myself feel all those things. And then I usually get an idea about what I might do that would be even more interesting and more beautiful than what I was doing before. And then I focus on that and try to transform whatever that energy is, even if it's, comes from a place of anger momentarily, into something that's beautiful. And that is, I mean, if you think about it, like that is the practice of an artist. And that is what we do. We have to deal with our reality, and we have to deal, as Freire would say, critically and creatively with it. It's not going to change. And part of our reality is a lot of people telling us that we can't do what we must do. So
I think that's probably a good place to stop. Fabulous to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Really great.